So this chapter is called Ingenuity versus Catastrophe. All right. So population growth and consumption lead to, according to Greta Thunberg, exhaustion of resources, shortages, hunger, mass deaths. Right? That's what the environmental movement says. And you may have seen Al Gore's movie, I believe it came out in 2006, An Inconvenient Truth. And he basically predicted that due to, at that time they were calling it global warming, basically the ice sheets in Greenland would collapse and melt, and the sea levels would rise all over the world. And he said in the near future, sea levels could rise up to 20 feet. So that is a scary thought. I mean, you have to admit, I mean, just visualize the sea levels rising by 20 feet, okay? Basically, all the coastal cities on the east coast of the United States, in west coast, all over the world, right? Most of the cities on the sea coast, they would all be underwater. Okay, it's a frightening prediction that he made, right? And then if we look at other predictions, then in 1995, the New York Times published this article. Scientists say that the Earth's warming could set off wide disruptions. At the most likely rate of rise, some experts say most of the beaches on the east coast of the United States would be gone in 25 years. So this is in 1995. If you add 25 years to 1995, you get 2020. Okay, and they're saying most of the beaches on the east coast of the U.S. would be gone. I think you can still go swimming at Jones Beach. Okay, I think the beaches are at Rockaway. I think the beaches are still there, if I'm correct. All right? I remember John Hessel tried to take me surfing on the Rockaway Beach. I didn't have much success. But the beach was there, okay? It was there. All right. So what about mass starvation? In 1950, agriculture produced 1 million metric tons of fish. In 2016, agriculturists raised 80 million metric tons of fish. Quite an advance. And then let's look at the another report by the economist Vaclav Smil, and he basically farmed fish provides nearly half of the world aquatic diet. Okay, there's been so much development in farm fishing that actually, if you look, China actually is the biggest, nation for farmed fish, followed by India, Indonesia, Egypt, Norway, Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. Okay. All right. It's been a 36-fold rise in agriculture in the last 50 years. Okay. So, and then, here's an example, rooftop fish farms to feed Germany's sprawling urban population. There's a company called Efficient City Farming, brings agriculture to town centers, putting fish tanks in car parks to provide sustainable food to city dwellers. I don't know how they're doing, but that's one example. Despite claims of extreme weather, agricultural and marine commodities such as tea, coffee, shrimp, and salmon have become radically cheaper. From 1961 to 2020, wheat yields doubled. And these are for, the United Kingdom, Italy, India, United States, Brazil, many, many countries, it doubled. The number of persons fed per farmer in the United States from 1940 to 2016. So one farmer could feed 18 and a half people in 1940. In 2016, one farmer could feed 164 people. So there's been a huge increase, based on technology, fertilizers, and different things. What about solutions for drought? Drought is a big problem in many countries around the world. Israel has a big drought problem. But they built six desalination plants, and that provides tap water for the 9.2 million people who live in Israel. And they also send about 200 million cubic meters of desalinated water every year to Jordan. And they can use that population centers, agriculture, and industry. So, and the only limitation for this, the main limitation, of course, is the cost of energy. It's very energy intensive. So having cheap energy actually would make it possible for many, many countries to desalinate water from the ocean. Global life expectancy rose from 53 years in 1960 to 72 years in 2017. So that's nearly a 40% increase. And the reasons include dramatic decline in infant mortality and improved nutrition. Between 1950 and 2020, the average global income per person rose from about $4,100 per year to almost $17,000 per year. That's over a 300% increase in income. The Chinese average incomes rose from under $700 to over $14,000. Indian incomes rose from $842 to $6,600. In sub-Saharan Africa, incomes rose from $2,200 to over $4,000. So there's a huge development all over the world. Extreme poverty has plummeted. In 1981, 42% of the people in the world lived in extreme poverty, but in 2015, it was down to 10%. There's been a huge, huge progress. What about the environment? Okay. Between 1982 and 2016, the global tree canopy cover increased by an area larger than Alaska and Montana combined. And I watched a video today and an article about an interview with a professor at Princeton, Professor William Happer, and I want to read what he said in that interview. Carbon dioxide is what drives life on Earth. The growth of plants depends on carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide in the air diffuses into the leaves of plants through little holes, and the plants combine this with water, and it requires energy. This energy comes from sunlight. So the combination of carbon dioxide, the so-called pollutant, water, and sunlight is what makes life. And carbon dioxide at the present time is much lower in concentration than has been prevailed over most of geological history. During most of geological history, it's pretty clear from proxy records, CO2 levels have been 2 or 3 times greater than they are now. We probably don't have enough fossil fuels around to restore those levels where plants evolve and where they function best. But even the relatively small increases we've had from maybe 280 or 300 parts per million 200 years ago to a little over 400 today, that is not a big increase. It's 35% maybe, but it's caused greening all over the world. You can see that from satellites looking down over the last 2 or 3 decades. The Earth is getting greener. Especially arid regions are getting greener. You know, the edges of the great deserts of the Earth are shrinking. They're not growing, they're shrinking. So if you look at this chart here, you can see the share of land covered by forest for the United States, which is the purple line on top, and then the green line is for France, and then the next line is for England, and next is for Scotland. So you can see, let's just start in the year 1400. Starting in 1400, the amount of forest, the land that's covered by forest, you could see a pretty rapid decrease, right? And that decrease in forest in France, look at the green line, was basically based on population growth in France, what we now call France, and because they needed land for agriculture, and they needed wood for energy and for construction. But then you'll see that starting in the 1800s, it starts to level out, and then the amount of forest starts to increase through the 20th century up until our time. You can see this rapid increase in forest in France, okay? And that's partly because basically there are other materials to provide mainly for energy, for sure, right? You don't need to burn wood anymore. I mean, if you want to have a wood stove, I think Kyle has a wood stove, okay? But you don't have to have a wood stove. You don't have to go out and cut a tree down every day to warm your house, unless you really want to. You can use, gas and oil energy, various forms of energy. And we can see the same pattern for England, Scotland, and also for the United States. So we see that as countries become prosperous and they move away from using wood energy from biomass, from wood, and they can use also new materials for construction and so on. They're using less wood, basically. So that allows the forest, to grow more. So modest climate warming has led to record crop production. Global crop yields have set new records almost every year. The U.S. crop yields have continued to grow, setting new records nearly every year in the last decade or so. Longer growing seasons, higher temperatures, and greater concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide are creating ideal crop conditions. If you have a greenhouse and you want the plants in your greenhouse to grow rapidly, what do? You buy a tank of carbon dioxide and you put more carbon dioxide into the greenhouse, and the plants grow faster. If things are getting better, why don't most of us know that? Well, there are a few reasons. Number one, humans are wired to pay attention to threats. Organisms that treat threats as more urgent than opportunities have a better chance to survive and reproduce. So we definitely pay attention to threats, right? Also, information is sifted through the amygdala. Because survival is more important than all other considerations, most information is first sifted through the amygdala, a part of the brain that is responsible for primal emotions like rage, hate, and fear. Okay, so we're wired to pay attention to threats. Now, you probably did not read an article in yesterday's newspaper that 45,000 planes landed safely. You might have, but I don't think you did, okay? But you may have read the following article from USA Today: shock and disbelief, World War II bomber and smaller plane collide and crash at the Dallas Air Show. And that was in November, just a month ago, basically. So if something bad happens, it gets reported on the front page of the newspaper. If 45,000 planes land safely, nobody cares. We expect that to happen. So rising expectations, mass progress. When the world gets better, we become harsher critics of it. It causes many to conclude it hasn't gotten better at all. Progress tends to mask itself. Now, another issue we have to think about is pessimism about the future leads to falling birth rates. And, there's been so much scare about overpopulation, but actually in many, many countries, the problem is underpopulation. Because as fewer babies are being born, then the population is getting older. And then you have more people retiring, and there's a lack of younger workers to actually pay taxes to support the retiring workers, because the government already spent the money they put in for Social Security. The government already spent that, a long time ago. So, in the advanced nations, birth rates are far below the replacement rate of, they say, 2.1, right? So you figure, each couple needs to have at least 2 children to, replicate themselves, and then 0.1 is for, maybe some deaths and so on. Now, the only exception to this is that people of faith want to continue their lineage. If you look at the birth rates for Orthodox Jews, the Amish, exactly, practicing evangelical Christians, there's certain religious groups, practicing Muslims, their birth rates are actually, much higher. And I'll give you an example of this. This chart is showing, so the average fertility rate for a woman who never goes to church is a little bit over 1 child. Okay, it's like 1.2 children on average per woman who's not religious, basically. And then if you go over to women who go to church basically every week, they have like 3.3 children on average. So religious women on average have 2 more children in their lifetime than women who are not religious. So you think about this. Governments all over the world are begging and paying people to have children. And honestly speaking, it doesn't work. Okay, having a child is a pretty big decision, I think, right? And just appealing, it really has not been very effective. And in some countries, Japan and South Korea, I think South Korea is like below one per woman. It is extremely low, okay? Many, if you look at Italy and many countries in Europe, they're now the only reason that the European countries have a population that's not decreasing is because they have a lot of migrants from other countries, right? From Northern Africa, Middle East, and so on. To summarize, predictions of mass starvation, shortages, and climate catastrophe made during the past 50 years have been proven to be false. Human innovations and creativity have led to more greening of the earth, not less. But there is another threat to the free market system that made all this possible: the demand that governments must go beyond their limited powers to end systemic racism. In the next chapter, which is divided into 4 sections, we will discuss the question, is America evil?